Another fun bit of Invader Zim censorship, in the episode Bad Bad Rubber Piggy, where Zim is using rubber pigs in a time machine to horribly injure Dib in his past, they originally wanted Dib to die in this episode. They wanted Zim to actually succeed in his bizarre plan here and kill off Dib, and then Dib would be replaced with another kid with very similar motives named Louie. Or possibly be replaced with Squee from one of Jhonen Vasquez's old comic series. That's what they said anyways, but there's a little more to it. My video about Gravity Falls censorship has gotten a ton of attention, which I honestly really wasn't expecting. Thank you so much for watching that. Because of the popularity of that video, it's got me thinking about some more examples of cartoon censorship that I know about. And well, this Gravity Falls one ended up actually reminding me of a pretty major one. So on Alex Hirsch's tweet about censorship, the composer for Invader Zim and the creator for Invader Zim replied and shared a little story about their experience with censorship at Nickelodeon. Kevin Manthe, the composer, said, "I remember similar things Jhonen had to deal with on Zim. He ended up writing in many notes as dialogue, right Jhonen?" And then Jhonen Vasquez, who's the creator of Invader Zim, replied and said, "That's true. Like that little kid who asked all the same questions about character motivations in our Screaming Spaceman show. He got shoved under the bed and was never seen again." So this is a direct reference to the Christmas episode of Invader Zim, the Most Horrible Xmas Ever. This episode is about Zim discovering Santa and realizing that humans pretty much worship him. So he downloads a bunch of data about Santa and builds a Santa robot that makes him a very realistic Santa. He then uses that to trick people into thinking he's the real Santa Claus, and they end up worshipping him and building a teleporter for him. But it turns out that Zim downloaded too much Jolly data, so the Santa Claus suit begins to think it's actually Santa Claus and begins to slowly take over Zim's mind. It begins to slowly take over Zim's mind until it fully becomes a giant Santa monster, so Dib uses a giant mech robot from his dad's secret base on the North Pole. Yeah, very straightforward episode that isn't bizarre or confusing at all. I mean, I think because it's so absurd, it makes it one of the best Christmas specials ever. This episode takes place as a flashback, where a robot snowman from the future is telling a bunch of kids the story of what happened to Zim on Christmas. And one of these kids ends up having the most bizarre acting you will ever hear in your entire life, questioning the entire story of the episode. This dialogue was apparently entirely based on notes they received from S&P.
What does he have to gain or to lose? And the mechanizations of this malfunctioning Santa suit completely elude me.
As I was saying, things look bad for Dib.
Yeah, that's a really funny moment, and it's very iconic to me, and I had no idea about this, but it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it is a pretty confusing episode, but I'm gonna assume that S&P actually wrote their note exactly like what this kid says. Another example of Invader Zim making fun of Nickelodeon is actually one of the reoccurring characters. I mean, he kinda barely shows up, but there's a character named Nick that Zim does experiments on. He's got this giant, happy drill in his head that makes him extremely enthusiastic all the time. And he also has a shirt that is pretty blatantly supposed to be the Nickelodeon logo. So this whole character is kind of just like a big joke on, the type of kid that Nickelodeon expects to be watching the show. Or to be watching their channel. Just a literally painfully happy little kid. You know, like the complete juxtaposition of the vibes that Invader Zim gives off. Nickelodeon was trying to make Zim as kid-friendly as possible, but the creators just wouldn't have it. So they inserted this happy kid character just to make fun of that kind of expected audience that Nickelodeon kept forcing them to aim towards. But I'm sure we all know Invader Zim is a pretty, grotesque show. Very different from many ones out there, so it's had a ton of censorship throughout its life. But this Christmas episode in particular was actually quite heavily censored, so much so that they actually released an uncensored version of it on DVD. What could have possibly been cut from this episode? Well, a lot of weird stuff actually. You'll be pretty surprised. It's not like it's a lot of very dirty things. There's basically one joke that sticks out in my mind as something pretty particularly violent in this episode, but a lot of the stuff that was cut is just weird additional things. So this uncut version was released on the complete series box set that came out for the show. And it's kind of confusing because I'm pretty sure that this box set had individual releases of its DVDs as well. But the individual DVD does not have the uncut version. Only the disc that came with the box set has the uncut version. And I actually happen to own both from my childhood, although they're both heavily scratched because, kids don't take care of DVDs. So I don't know if they still really work. One of them is from the box set and one of them is just from my parents buying it because they saw it online. Now, a lot of the changes in this episode were actually like weirdly subtle things. Like, I don't understand if these were things that Nickelodeon had to alter because of like confusion, or like they just didn't like the tone of it and stuff. But there are a lot of notes here I'm reading on the wiki that just seem like super minor dialogue changes. So I guess I'll just start with the two biggest differences that I was already aware of. There's one scene where Zim is being interviewed on TV, and in the uncut version, he's talking with a fake deep voice trying to sound like a pro wrestler like Hulk Hogan. And he says, "Oh yeah," which is the catchphrase for Kool-Aid Man. I mean, for Macho Man Randy Savage. I don't know why this was cut, because I specifically remember as a kid, the version of this I watched on my DVD had him talking in his deep voice. But in the version of the episode that aired on TV, Zim just spoke with his normal voice. At the end of the interview part 2, there's a bit of an echoing dialogue, because Dib says, "Oh no," and then Zim was supposed to say, "Oh yeah," and it was going to echo. But in the censored version, it just plays the news anchor saying, "That sounds like a lot of fun." And the other major scene that honestly I think is really funny because of how absolutely morbid it is. There's a point where Dib and his giant robot are fighting the demon Santa. And they end up knocking down a piece of, I'm pretty sure, the teleporter the humans were building. The piece falls towards a crowd and everybody runs away, except for one guy who stands in the middle, opens up his arms, and is crushed to death by the piece of rubble that fell. This happens in the uncut version of the episode. But in the cut version of the episode that aired on TV, it just kind of skips that part. Like, you see everybody run away and that guy is still standing still. You just don't see him open his arms and get crushed by the rubble. Obviously, this one you could easily tell why Nickelodeon wouldn't want to show some guy happily getting murdered on screen, but I think it's really, really funny because it's so bizarre, and I'm sure that's why they wrote it in too. But of course, unfortunately, it had to be removed, but is still present on the uncut version that was released on DVDs. I mean, I guess the joke here is supposed to be that, like, the humans love Santa so much that this guy is more than willing to just die for Santa. Like, the way they treat Santa like some sort of god in this episode is hilarious. Also, it's important to note that Nickelodeon received 103 complaints from angry parents saying their children were disturbed and frightened by the grotesque mutated Santa. Which, I guess I can understand. But it's not that creepy. Also, all the, like, Christmassy juice that comes out of this robot suit really, like, looks like blood, even though it's just slightly too pink to be blood, but it was definitely their intent to make it look like blood. All the other changes in this episode are just more minor dialogue things, but yeah, it's just very small stuff. Like there's a scene where Gur's eating snow and Zim is trying to get people to watch it, and he says, in the version that aired on TV, he says, "Watch the dog eat snow," but in the uncut version, he says, "Watch it eat snow," like just using it to refer to Gur. I have no idea why they had to change that. I guess Nickelodeon was being really picky and just thought it was like not specific enough to call Gur an it. I don't really know. There's a lot of interesting trivia about this episode, with it being the seemingly final one of the series and everything. But another really interesting piece of trivia is how this is the first episode where Minnie Moose shows up. One of Zim's new sidekicks that was going to be introduced in an episode before this, but the show was canceled, so that episode was never actually produced. The episode was called Nubs of Doom, and because that episode never aired, the writers did want to add in a joke to this episode that would flash back to previous episodes of Zim and show Minnie Moose just like poorly photoshopped into the background slightly off camera, to show that he was always around, he just was never important until the Christmas episode. But of course that wasn't the case if this lost episode ever got created, but it didn't. Another fun bit of Invader Zim censorship that, okay, well honestly this one is just completely a joke apparently, but I used to think it was true, and I mean you would believe it, honestly. In the episode Bad Bad Rubber Piggy, where Zim is using rubber pigs in a time machine to horribly injure Dib in his past, there was a joke among the crew that they originally wanted Dib to die in this episode. They wanted Zim to actually succeed in his bizarre plan here and kill off Dib, and then Dib would be replaced with another kid with very similar motives named Louie, or possibly be replaced with Squee from one of Jhonen Vasquez's old comic series. They talk about this on the DVD commentary for the episode, so it definitely seemed like it was like a true thing that they might have considered at some point. But it turns out Eric Trueheart, one of the writers, recently published a book about writing for Zim, and he's mentioned that that's just completely a joke. So yeah, Invader Zim is a very interesting beast. There is a ton of awesome trivia to discuss. I've really been considering doing like an iceberg video for Zim because I know a lot of trivia, but that would require me to like look through the show again, listen to interviews, listen to DVD commentaries, because there is just so much really interesting creative stuff and censorship and cut episodes and movies and all sorts of plans for this show that just never got to see the light of day that are definitely worth talking about. So let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in hearing more about Zim or just hearing more about cartoon censorship in general. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, please hit the like button so more viewers like you can find this video. Please consider subscribing to my channel with notifications on to see my future content, and follow me on other sites like TikTok and Twitter for special exclusives. Thank you very much for watching. Please stay tuned for more.